that'll be available. That'll be available to everyone afterwards. And also, I'm going to be showing a slide deck that we have prepared for our campaign. And I want you all to know that everything, the whole entire slide deck that we'll be showing today will be available after the event as well. So, you know, don't try to rush to write down everything. You'll have all that information. I just want to, I just ask folks if you, it looks like almost everybody, if you're not actually speaking, if you could keep yourself muted during the presentation. We will have time for questions. During the presentation, I'm going to present a little bit about our campaign with the Susquehanna Valley chapter. And then Kay is going to present a few slides about the EPA program and the listening session that she attended. And then Julie is going to present another case study at the end. And in between each of those, we'll have time for questions if you want. And also, you can put them in the chat during the presentation if you're like me and you're not sure you're going to remember your question all the way to the end of the slide. So, okay, yep. So I just want to introduce the people who put this presentation together. As I said, I'm Sandy Field. I'm with the Susquehanna Valley chapter of the Climate Reality Project. Also from my chapter, Kay Kramer and Michelle Mitchell, who are here. And from the Philadelphia and Southeastern PA chapter, we have Abba Sani and Julia Nakla. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar. And unless there's something I've forgotten to say, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started with the presentation. Okay. Can everyone see that okay? All right. So where I'd like to start is with what we've done for our chapter, for the Susquehanna Valley chapter, to start our electric school bus campaign. A number of us heard about a couple of different funding programs that have been started to make electric school buses available to school districts. And within our chapter, this has been an extremely popular campaign. Hi, I'm sorry, could you mute yourself, Bill? Thank you. So the first thing we did was we generated interest. We developed a fact sheet so we could gather information about the different programs that are available for school districts to use to get electric school buses. We identified our target districts, which are shown here on the right side of the slide, the ones in our area. Different people who are in those districts agreed to approach their school district about the program. And we attended an EPA listening session, which Kay is going to be talking to you about at the end of my presentation. And then we also developed a slide deck that we envisioned that we would be going to our school boards, and we would be presenting our arguments for why school buses would be of benefit to school districts, and also about the funding opportunities. So we've started that process. We've made the slide deck, as I'm going to show you. We've made the fact sheet, and we've reached out, and we've learned quite a bit already about how to get the funds for these school buses. So the first thing is we learned that it's not necessarily going to be the school board that you're going to be approaching. That may be the case in some school districts. It depends on who makes the decisions in your school district about school buses. And so in some school districts, it's a business manager or a person called the transportation coordinator. And in my school district, it happens to be a bus contractor called Rohrer that provides all the buses for the school district, and then the business manager works on the contract with that. And so it turns out that even though I'm going to show you the slide deck, we may not actually have to show the slide deck to anyone, because the bus company is already well aware of the funding and can work with the school district to get that. So it just depends on what your individual situation in your school district is, who you're going to approach, and you're going to have to do a little bit of research to figure out who that is. So next, I'm just going to show you, this is the start of the slide deck that we've made, and I'm not going to go into all of these slides. There's about 15 of them in great detail, but what I want to show you is the basic slide deck that you can start with, and you can use this as a starting point for when to design your own presentation if you do end up speaking to a school board or to a group of people that you'd like to persuade and give the information about these electric school buses too. So that's what these next like 15 slides are. And so I'm not going to go into them in incredible detail. I just want you to know that this will be available to you for starting your campaign. So here is some information about the benefits of school buses, electric school buses. You know, they're cheaper, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they can be used in cold weather. Apparently some people are concerned about the range of buses, the electric buses in colder weather, which is definitely true that they do have a shorter range in cold weather, but they're perfectly suitable for that. There are economic benefits to having electric school buses. The charging costs are much less, and I'll have a little bit more data about this in a later slide, but it's like 80% less than using diesel fuel, and the maintenance is much less. They have many fewer moving parts, and so maintenance of these buses is costs the school district much less. So over time, they're going to see significant savings in how they have to manage these buses. But of course, the downside is that they're going to have staff trained to work on these buses. And again, if they have a bus contractor, then some of those maintenance things may be alleviated. Here again, this is just another slide about maintenance costs, how much these electric buses in dollars, how much these can save school districts, $4,000 to $11,000 per bus per year on fuel and maintenance costs compared to diesel buses. There's also health benefits to having electric buses. Mostly just all the downsides of diesel buses because they are so polluting, and because children are riding in these buses, and children are uniquely or more vulnerable to this kind of pollution than adults are. They have asthma. They have, you know, the air. The pollution within the bus actually is higher than the pollution outside of the bus. And so there are definite health benefits. And also, again, I mentioned in the first slide, I think, electric buses don't emit CO2, so they don't have the same climate impact as diesel buses. This is a slide of some of the questions that you may be asked by someone, and when you're talking to them about electric school buses. So what is the range? About 100 to 150 miles, and that's about enough for 90% of bus runs. So if you think about where your buses go in your neighborhoods, you know, it's not on the order of 150 miles for how far a bus has to go each day. There's also, for my school district, they actually run the buses twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon, and they would have an opportunity to charge in between those runs. So that's another thing to consider. The charging is level 2 charging, which is 240 or 208 volts. There's higher level charging, I forget the volts, but that can reduce the charge time. So this is at this level, it's 6 to 8 hours of charging needed for a full charge. But again, in between those runs, they may not need a full charge. So the buses could go back and charge for a few hours and have enough charge to do their afternoon run. If they had the higher level charges, then they could recharge in like 3 hours. How much is the electricity for electric school buses? 28 cents per mile compared to about $1 per mile for diesel. And if you've been paying attention to diesel, it's only going up right now. So that's a big savings. And then the downside, of course, is how much do these buses cost right now? And this should be coming down. But right now, these buses cost about 2.5 times what diesel buses cost. So school districts will have in their budget, they will have budgeted for diesel school buses. And so in some cases, they may be a priority school district that will get full funding for a school bus. In other cases, if they are not a priority school district, they have they don't meet low income requirements of grants or whatever that the funding opportunity is, they may get only a part of the funding for their school bus. And so just bear in mind that they will have some budget for replacing their buses. And so even if they just get 50% of it, that could make a big difference. And then the charges themselves are between $500 and $3,000, depending on the bells and whistles they get basically on the chargers. And my understanding is that districts, even if you contract for buses, you will have to have a way to charge them within your district. So school districts will have to manage this part of it, this having the chargers on site. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Are there any questions in the chat? I can't see the chat, I guess. No? Okay, I'll just keep going. So this is a case study that you can present to if you're, again, this is still the slide deck that we've made that we would show to school districts. This is for a school district in California that got money from their cap and trade program for electric school buses. They have a video. I have a video here. I'm not going to show you, but if you have time to show it, it's very, very compelling. The bus drivers love the buses. They're quiet. They make this fun little noise when they're at low speed. The kids love the buses. It's a really nice, heartwarming video, and it really makes the point that it's more than just the pollution. It's also the noise and just the general feeling of, this is a good thing to have in your district. So I'm going to move on. So what are the funding programs in Pennsylvania, or nationally right now? The EPA has just started their Clean School Bus program. They did the first round of funding last year. So they announced the funding in October, and I'll talk about that in just a couple of slides. But they have $5 billion over 5 years to spend on electric school buses in school districts, and also those contractors are also eligible to, and people who sell buses are also eligible to get funding. Right now, they are prioritizing these two high need and low income school district types: 43 rural remote and 42 rural distant. And if you go to this website, they have that list of who qualifies into those categories. And if you saw our target districts that I showed on one of my early slides for our school bus campaign, a couple of the districts that we're targeting do fall into these categories. So it's worth going through that list and finding the ones in Pennsylvania and seeing if your school district falls into that, because the funding for this year went mostly to these categories of school districts. There's also the Pennsylvania Driving PA Forward program, which is money from the Volkswagen emissions settlement funds. They have given out a lot of the money so far, and I have a number on that in a minute, so I'm not going to talk more about it, but it's another opportunity for funding for electric school buses for school districts. And here's the thing about how much funding is available. So $5 billion over 5 years, again, as I said, for the EPA program, up to 100% of the cost of the bus. Again, depending on whether you fit into those low income, your school district fits into those low income categories. For the Driving PA Forward program, $150,000 to $250,000 maximum for a school bus, 60% reimbursement. So what I learned in just looking at the update for this program is that they have 3.4 million left in the fund for electric school buses. So that's actually, in the bigger picture, not really that much money. So I'm wondering how much of an opportunity this is going to be for folks on this call. Definitely the EPA program at this time has a lot more money. So that's just something to consider. And so this would be the final slide that you would show to your school district. You know, what's next for your school district. They will have to do some research about the funding, meet the deadlines, and apply for the funding. They will have to figure out how it's going to work in their district as far as facilities and where they're going to put in their chargers and things like that, and then the training of their maintenance drivers, their maintenance staff and the drivers, and then community outreach, just to make sure that people are aware of what they're doing, and you know, getting buy-in from the community for the program. So this is just a slide about the possible timeline. Could take up to a couple of years for a school district to get their school buses. So it's worth, you know, making sure that they understand that, you know, it's a long-term process. They need to do planning and all of these other steps that go into it. So this is just the final slide of that, of our slide deck that we would show. So here's where you would put in your email address if you're giving the presentation, so that they can contact you, and then the other information about EPA. So we've actually had a couple of nice interactions with EPA, asked them questions, and they've responded. So that's definitely worth trying if you have questions about their program. They also have a nice fact sheet on their website and updated information about who they gave money to and stuff this year. So this is just the final slide. I think I've said final slide like 3 times, sorry. But this would just be, so this slide is the end of my presentation that I would be giving to a school district. And then we're going to shift now to Kay is going to talk to you about what she learned from the EPA listening session, but I'd like to take a moment to see if folks have any questions on this part of the talk.
There were a couple questions in the chat, Sandy, if you want to take a look at that.
Oh, I guess I can. All right.
I can read it to you, Sandy, if you like.
I can see. What are funding recommendations for school districts that can't afford the outlay of buying the buses, even if they'll get 100% rebate eventually? So, I'm not. So we have had some question about, and maybe Kay or Michelle could jump in with this a little bit more. We have had some question about when the money comes and when the buses come, and whether school districts will have to lay out the money in advance and then get the, and get the bus and then get the funding from the grant agency afterward. EPA says the money's going to come right away and you're going to be able to buy your buses, but we haven't had an opportunity to find out that from people who've actually gotten approved for the program this year. Did someone else have a comment they wanted to say?
Well,
yeah,
many of our,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead,
Well, I was
Michelle.
going to say that many of our school buses are leased through a contracting company, and they will be the ones who will be getting the award on behalf of the school district to purchase these buses. So I don't think that is going to be a big issue if that's the situation in your district.
And I'll be addressing this
but I'll just anticipate it a little. But I saw that Christine had another question, which I was definitely going to address. This past year, the program was a rebate program. And so as the EPA has explained it, you apply, you put in your application, they make the awards, they give you the money, you go buy your school bus. So that's how it was for last year. Now after that, they're doing a grant application instead, which is more complex. You have to put in a much more complicated application. You would get the award, you'd enter a contract and commit to buy the buses. And then you have to send in a special piece of paperwork to the EPA, and they give you the money. And they said that they expect to have the money back to the schools before they actually have to pay, or to the contractors. But I am not 100% sure that they weren't telling me that that was how the rebate program was working. So it seems so hard to believe that they could turn around all this, before the school district or the contractor has to get their bus. But that's what they did tell me in a email that I sent.
And if you have a contractor, they will help or totally facilitate filling out the forms on behalf of the school district.
But a lot of school districts will be doing their own. The bigger school districts will do their own, probably.
Right.
I'm not completely sure about that, maybe.
No, it is true.
There's also-
Rohrer just told me today that that for the applications that they submitted, they're a very large bus contracting agency and bus sales company in Pennsylvania, and they got the third largest award in the nation of school buses in this rebate program. And so they, I think the number was 54 buses.
Yes. So there's also a question from Bill about an estimated payback that can be calculated, typical number of years a bus is maintained. My understanding is that diesel buses last about 15 years, and that electric school buses are expected to last longer than that, probably. But at this point, I'm not sure that we know. What we do know is that the maintenance cost for the electric school buses is going to be considerably less, and that, yeah, and they're certainly going to be less polluting. And then, Edward asks about retrofitting existing buses. I have not heard anything about that.
Sandy, I can speak to that a little bit. Just today, in talking to the representative from Rohrer, he told me that there is a company in northeastern Pennsylvania, and there may be more, called Franklin Vehicle Group, and they're doing conversions. And the conversion of the diesel to the electric bus, the cost is about $80,000 less than a factory model bus, a new factory model bus. And he gave me, a lot of statistics about that. So he said that the conversion cost is $200,000. If the basic bus cost was $120,000, that would be $320,000. So I guess they're using a $400,000 figure for the cost of a new bus, a factory bus. And so about an $80,000 savings. And this company is apparently growing with the same or better warranty and support once the bus is purchased.
So my question, Michelle, is then does it still qualify for the EPA grants?
Right.
Oh, that's a really good question. We did not talk about that specifically, but I can ask that question. That's really good.
So I think you can see from the questions that this is, for us, we're still learning a ton about electric school buses, and it's also, things are changing even as we, pursue these opportunities and talk to people. So you'll have to do research in your own community. I am going to move the slides ahead for Kay to talk about, unless somebody else has another question. I didn't see any more in the chat. To talk about the EPA listening session that she attended, where EPA didn't answer questions. They were intent on listening to input from stakeholders. Kay, do you want the next slide?
No, I'll do this one first. Yes, I attended this EPA listening session in early October. They presented it to see what stakeholders' comments were on the way the program had gone in the first round. And when I listened to that one back in October, Sandy said, "What did you get out of it?" Nothing, except that there are a lot of people out there who know a heck of a lot, and I don't know anything. So then I re-listened to the webinar just this last week, and I guess I've done enough research that at least I knew what people were talking about now. So Sandy said, give you a few takeaways. It was a long session, 2 hours, and there were people from all over the country. Many, I guess most, had some experience in applying for these rebates, and some were from gigantic school districts, and some were from very small school districts. So their comments were all over the board. So I'm just going to give you a few sort of major categories, I guess. Next slide, Sandy. So as I said, the EPA guy went into the difference between the rebate and the grant in some detail. But as Sandy said, they wouldn't answer questions. So someone said, well, why did you change from a rebate to a grant, since the rebate worked really well and was easy to administer? He said, we're not here to answer questions. We just want comments. So she said, well, that's my comment. Why don't you consider making it a rebate program again? So they had asked for suggestions in several different areas, which I have there, but I'm not going to give comments from every single subset. But my takeaways were that most people thought that infrastructure, as in charging stations, was the limiting factor for building out an electric fleet. They did pay for infrastructure. They did give grants or rebates for infrastructure, but some of the bigger companies or school districts were interested in looking ahead. Like, they would think they might want to build out a large infrastructure of chargers so that as their fleet increases, they wouldn't have to keep going back and building more. And then, the other thing that was a limiting factor was if sources. They said, if we just are gonna, and everybody knows that in every area of renewables that, if you're just increasing the coal-fired power plant output, that's not going to do a whole lot for the climate. So there's a lot of interest in getting utilities that are using renewables to provide output for you. Anyway, but that was the limiting factor, and the comments generally thought that the government needs to think broadly about that, how to allow people to apply for larger infrastructure projects. A lot of people talked about the replenishment cycle for retiring school buses. The bigger ones, and probably smaller school districts too, change or replenish or change out their school buses every like 10% of the fleet a year, for example. So this had to do with the number of buses that could be obtained through the funding. And they said, you know, for the big school buses companies or districts that have hundreds of buses, you know, limiting the number of buses to say, I think, what was it this time? 25, I think, is all you could get funding for. But that might not be sufficient for a bigger district that's turning over 30, 40, 50 a year. So that was one of the comments. And Julie's going to talk a little bit about another program that used consulting services in Maryland. And a lot of people did because there's a lot of expertise that the districts need in order to talk with the utilities, talk with the, you know, do the grant applications, contract for buses if, you know, they don't already have a contractor. So there are a lot, it's very complex, and a lot of people did use consultants for that, but they were not reimbursed for consulting. And so that was one of the comments, that maybe they'd like to think about having some funding for consulting services. They talked about alternative sources of funding, for example, maybe under the infrastructure, the Inflation Reduction Act, that there might be some money available in the electrification efficiencies portions of that bill, but it's very complicated and has not been figured out yet. So, but that's a possible funding. There are other pots of money here and there. Again, the consultant could be very helpful in school buses finding that, or districts finding that. And I think that's about all I have on that slide. Sandy, next slide. So Sandy just put together this slide talking about the funding in Pennsylvania from this first round of rebate awards. In October, they announced $4 billion in applications for a $500 million availability in grants. That was bumped up to about $1 billion, just under. So 965 million was awarded, and most of it did go to the prioritized school districts, tribal school districts, and rural communities. In Pennsylvania, Scranton, Nanticoke, and Harrisburg in our area received funding, as well as I found out Potter County, which got a couple of buses, and Cadott, Lycoming, which got one. Aurora buses, which supplies a lot of our surrounding districts, got the top spots and got the most buses. They got about 40 buses, although I think Michelle said it was more than that. But I think they actively went out and talked to school districts and alerted them to the opportunity there. So, and they offered to do all the paperwork. So that's part of how they managed to get all that. The next submission period begins in the spring, but the EPA doesn't know the hard and fast dates yet, because I think this funding opportunity will be so much different from the rebate program. And also, I think they'll be incorporating some of the comments and figuring out how to do that. So look for it in the spring, they may even just blur all the 4 years together, sort of, and have a sort of a rolling application. So anyway, but we need to be sure that we're ready to pounce when the awards are announced, award period is announced. Okay, I think that's all I've got.
Were there any questions during that? I don't see anything in the chat. Did anyone want to ask about the listening session? Okay, then we'll move on to Julia, who's going to present a case study of one of those people those districts that use a contractor.
All right, next slide. Okay, so there's these consulting services that bring turnkey solutions to school districts getting electric school buses. So I like to think of these companies as like sort of being travel agents for EV fleet services, in that the school district gives them sort of a general description of what they want to do, and then these companies bring options back to them that covers end-to-end solutions. And because this is something that these companies do all the time, they're very familiar with the funding options that are out there, and how to fill out the grants and everything. So that would eliminate your school district having to do all that research. So like some of the things that they do, look into the financing. They make it possible to spread out the costs in order to reduce the upfront costs. Some of them have like a subscription service, which we're going to be talking about a little bit more when we talk about the Maryland case study. They'll do things like sizing the system. So, as much as everybody wants to have, convert their fleet to 100% electric school buses up front, that may not make sense. So like you'll see in the Maryland case where they buy a few, up front, and then a few more every year. Planning and building your EV infrastructure and integrating it with the power company that will allow you to feed electricity back to the grid, which I don't think we talked about too much, but that's like a way that your school district can actually earn money back by if you're it's called V2G, vehicle to grid. All these batteries that are in these school buses can store the electricity and then feed it back to the grid. And because they're on such a rigid schedule, you'll know, the power company knows exactly, when that the buses will be running and when they'll be available. And like, for summertime, there's, available almost all the time, which is great, because then they can really tap into those resources when, they need the extra electricity, like, between like, 4 and 8 p.m. when people come home from work. Typically that's a time period when there's a lot of electricity usage, and it can actually, it can reduce them having to use a peaker power plant, or, once we get enough of these electric school buses, possibly even eliminate having to build a peaker power plant in the future. It can manage the charging to minimize the costs and maximize the revenue that I was just talking about from feeding electricity back, where the electric company would pay you for the electricity that you're putting back into the grid. These companies, they'd be responsible for training your staff, including the drivers and the maintenance staff, and they offer service plans for parts and labor of the school buses and the charging infrastructure. Next slide. So let's talk about Montgomery County, Maryland. And the first thing you need to know is that the school districts there are not like school districts in Pennsylvania. The entire county is a school district. So Montgomery County, Maryland is huge. It's the 14th largest school district in the country. They have over 1,300 school buses. They have 6 different transportation depots. They have 210 schools, and they transport 103,000 students to school daily. So they used one of these consulting services, Highland Electric Systems, to plan their purchase, the eventual purchase of 326 electric school buses from Thomas Built Buses. So that's one of the largest purchases so far of school buses in the country. And just because one of the questions that somebody asked when I was talking about this, where does Highland Electric Systems operate? Well, they have projects in 17 states and 2 Canadian provinces. So they are a nationwide company. They're not just Maryland, they're nationwide. So what Montgomery County, Maryland is going to do, so they're getting 25 buses in year 1, and then around 100 each year for a total of 4 years. And then, depending on how things go, hopefully things will go well, then they're going to get, more and more buses after that. But right now, that's what that is in their contract. So they pay a subscription fee, is the way Highland Electric Systems works. So that fee is structured to be the same or lower than the cost that you would have of owning, fueling, and maintaining diesel buses. So the idea there is to basically make it so that, having an electric school bus would be the same as if they had a diesel bus in terms of cost. And so in Montgomery County, Maryland, they calculated that the way it would work out for them for these electric school buses is that they're paying the same cost as they would for a diesel bus for the first 7 years, and then declining costs after that. And that they're counting on, in the future when they're buying, these 100 school buses each year, that the prices will go down for these school buses because, of course, because of scale, they'll be making more, prices will go down, and that the price of diesel will go up, which will make, what they're paying to charge the electric school buses look even better when you compare it to the diesel case. And maintenance reduction, over 50%, because electric school buses, all electric vehicles, are much easier to maintain than regular cars, because you don't have to worry about oil changes or all those moving parts and everything. It's a lot easier maintenance for electric school buses. And if that's, can you go back just for a second? If you're interested in learning more about that case, especially if this Highland Electric Systems type of service is of interest to you, there's a webinar called Back to School with Electric Buses, and when we send out the slides, you'll be able to access the link there for the webinar. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then that made me think about, well, our school system. I'm in the Methacton School District, and we don't own our school buses. We use First Student, which is considered, it's called Transportation as a Service, which is abbreviated TAAS. If you ever see that acronym, that's what that means, Transportation as a Service. So First Student is a company that provides transportation as a service to our school district and many other school districts in our area. So, because I was trying to figure out, well, how would this work with my school district since we don't own the school buses? So I went to First Student's website, and turns out they offer electric school buses. So I'm going to be talking to my school board about this possibility, because it sounds like First Student does a lot of the things that I was just telling you that this Highland Electric consulting service does. So it says they determine the feasibility, they identify funding options, determine the best vehicles. They use their size to drive down the upfront costs, optimize the fleet and routing to maximize the benefits of electric school buses. And they build out, certify, and manage the EV charging stations that you would need. And they establish and monitor the charging schedule that you'd want to use based on the local factors. And they manage the vehicle to grid buying and selling of electricity. So, so that sounds great. I'm super excited to know that First Student, which my school district uses, offers all of this. So I'm definitely going to be talking to my school board about this. All right, next slide. So when looking into this, I wanted to know, like, how many of these consulting services are out there. So it turns out there are several. Now I can't, I did not look into each one of these businesses to see if they do everything or a subset. So I can't speak to exactly all the services that each of these supply, but I just wanted to put the slide in here with some links to provide you guys with like a starting point for investigating this. And of course, this list is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered an endorsement or recommendation of their product, but it's out there to give you guys something to look into. And is that my last slide? I think that's my last slide. So, yep, thanks.
Great. Well, that's a lot of information. Thanks a lot, Julia. I appreciate that. But that was a lot of stuff I didn't know about. And it sounds like it could be really easy for especially for really big districts that need a lot of buses. So there were a couple of questions in the chat, I think. Jim asked if the e-buses are owned by a third party, how much of the cost savings is passed on to the school district? Does anyone have any comment on that? Because I'm not really sure.
Everything that I read seemed to say that their goal is to make it so that it's, you know, equivalent or less than a diesel bus. You know, because they want that's something they want these school districts to do. So so they'll try to, you know, like with First Student, they'll try to set it up so that you know, it makes sense to do it. And then you know, because they service so many different school districts and they're so large, they can spread out, you know, because it's such a big upfront cost, but then they can take that and spread that cost out. But you know, so that it's not as much of a burden to the school districts.
Great. And Jim also asks for suggestions about approaching the school board, because their school board is very political and very dysfunctional. And I think our research, from what we've, you know, tried so far, it seems clear that you may not have to actually approach the school board. It may be just a business manager or a bus contractor. But I think if you do have to approach the school board and you start to get some pushback, you know, the economic arguments are very strong especially for getting money from the EPA. But, you know, find some allies among parents and get them to come with you. And the kids can be very persuasive as well, would be my suggestions. Do others, Julia or Michelle or Kay, have suggestions based on their conversations?
I just looked through this really long document this afternoon that was all about vehicle to grid and how having these electric school buses, you know, by feeding the electricity back to the grid, especially at these key times, because they're like, you know, like I was saying before, like between 4 and 8 p.m. Well, that's when, you know, the sun starts setting. So you're not getting as much electricity from solar power. And by using these school buses with their, you know, big battery packs, then you can, you know, kind of more even out the, you know, electricity that's on the grid. And so I know, like, because I have solar panels and they pay you back. What you get back from PECO is equivalent to your cost for the, you know, for every kilowatt hour. So I would imagine it would be the same for these batteries, feeding that electricity back to the grid. So you're getting, you know, so your school district, or if you're, you know, doing it through, you know, like First Student or however that would work, you know, they're getting money back by feeding this electricity to the grid at, you know, especially because it's at these key times when the power company needs that electricity. And so that's another, you know, revenue source that you have.
I just want to comment. First of all, thank you for doing this webinar. It's really fascinating and I think very important. I mean, going back to my own school board, I mean, Central Bucks, but, you know, tying into my earlier question, unless this is going to save them money tomorrow, they just don't care about any of this stuff that we're talking about. They just don't care, right? Show me that it's going to save me money in next year's budget, or come back to me in 5 years. You know, it comes down to like every nickel and dime. And, you know, and I'm sure many school districts, you know, are in this boat. They don't want to raise taxes. So that's why, I asked how much of the money is returned to the school district. If it's just a break-even proposition, they're not going to be very interested, right? But if they can start saving, 10% or 20% on their costs, then of course they're going to be very interested. But you know, the fact that it returns energy to the grid, they don't care about any of that stuff. It's just, that we care about that stuff because it's cool and it's important, but they don't care.
But if they were making money
for it, then
Well,
that,
yeah,
you know. the
Yeah, no,
dollar
I
signs.
agree. But that's a lot for them to wrap their heads around. I mean, my school district is getting sued by the ACLU right now. So,
Well, Jim,
that's where we're at.
what do you think, Jim, if you were able to start a campaign among parents? Because I just wrote an op-ed for our paper, and after talking with Julia about all the health problems, I started to put them all in for the op-ed, and then I thought, you know what? We're not doing this really fast. Parents are going to be scared to death to know that this could happen to their kids from riding diesel buses. But I would
Yeah.
think that that might actually be a way to leverage,
Yeah.
parental power to
Yeah.
get your school board to do what it wants,
Yeah.
what that you
That's-
want.
Yeah, that's
they want.
I think that's a good way. It is hard to get to wrangle parents, I think, when everybody's so busy. But what I've tried to do is I've tried to meet with the environmental science clubs at the high schools and put on a presentation for mostly talking about solar and climate change. And the students have generated petitions and things like that. So I'm hoping that that will be the spark. But I think the parents is
What if the students gave the slide presentation to the school board?
That's-
I would love that.
that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah. So the
And,
next question,
Oh,
go ahead, Michelle.
well, Jim, the other thing is, I think this must be unique to each school district, but I know the gentleman from Roar today told me that the fuel costs are passed on to school districts, as are the maintenance costs, at least in their model. And so there will be significant savings in that regard.
So the next question from Dennis, there are some glitches that need to be worked out that are not making these buses a turnkey drive up and drop them off and go. I'm sorry, I don't understand this question.
I think that's just a comment that they're not glitch free, which is really what you'd expect from any new technology, I would think.
Yeah.
You're going to have some problems.
So the interesting thing about the video I didn't show you that's in that slide deck about the case study in California was that they thought that it was going to be hard to convince the bus drivers, and the bus drivers were like super on board. I mean, the one bus driver had the sound that the bus makes when it's below 15 miles an hour. She had that as her ringtone because she loved the bus so much. So I think they're probably easier to drive than diesel buses based on my own experience with electric cars. But yeah, I mean, certainly there's going to be convincing people who want to stick with the status quo. And so, the idea of what Julia talked about with the company, the school district that's getting a few buses and then a few more, getting those few buses can be the thing that makes everyone see that it's not as different as they thought it was.
And I'd like to touch upon, talking about the drivers, there's many benefits for them because then they're not breathing in those diesel fuel fumes all day. And the buses are quieter, so they're able to hear the students and what's going on their bus, which, I can't even imagine, having to both drive the bus and, control all the students. So, many things that I think the drivers would really, really like.
Right, one of the kids in the video says, "Oh yeah, we can listen to the radio in the bus."
Well, the other thing that is important is the idle time for the bus, because in the winter, the drivers have to arrive at least an hour before the bus, before the start time to leave with that bus to warm it up. And that is non-existent with the electric buses. You can program them to come, for the heat to come on to 70 degrees at such and such an hour. And so it completely eliminates that idle time. And that idle time also puts, diesel fumes into the air and is unhealthy for everyone.
So could I clarify my comment? This is Dennis Rowan.
Yes, please.
Great. So I've been driving electric 10 years. I'm the head of the Southeast chapter of Drive Electric. So I'm all in on the benefits of electric. But so in Montgomery County, and I have friends down there, of the first 25 buses delivered, 7 are operating. So I'm very, very upset about it, but I would just caution anybody. It is very early. On vehicle to grid, I was in on the first vehicle to grid experiment at the University of Delaware in 2009, but nobody has ever made $1 from vehicle to grid. So again, it's a fantastic technology, but I would really caution, do not expect this to be instant. Highland has delivered, I think, under 100 buses. So we're in the early days of that model. They raised about $240 million a couple of years ago, which is not much. So it's not for sure yet that if they're going to be around in a couple of years, that's something as a school district you have to consider. Hey, what if they go bankrupt? Who's going to come in and maintain and repair our buses? So I am all in on EVs, and that's why I'm very, very cautious. I want them to be deployed correctly. I think it's fantastic, everything that you're doing, but go search Montgomery County. That's a quote from a woman on the Parents Association from Montgomery County. So they're trying to figure out what's happening.
So why were the other buses not operational? Is it they didn't have the EV chargers for them, or was there an actual problem with the buses themselves?
I do not know the details on it, but if I would recommend, just calling the school district and getting the lowdown. If that's something you should do if you're going to choose any vendor. Talk to people who are using their product and before your school district uses them.
Right,
Great
and
comments, Dennis.
yeah, that's good advice too, because we're trying to call those school districts like Scranton that have gotten an award of from the EPA for buses this year. We'd like to find out what their experience is in order to inform our ability to let people know what to expect. But I appreciate that.
Yeah, one last thing. I would say I really believe in transportation as a service. I think Highland's model is the correct one because it's in the contract, though. If as the school district, you want to make sure that they're taking the economic risk and they're taking the technology risk. And when a bus doesn't perform, that they have a replacement to get the kids back and forth to school. So it's really, really important that when you frame that contract for your school district, that you have somebody very, very knowledgeable on your side, helping write the contract in the favor of your school district.
Good point.
And then we have a question from Pamela about the 10, 15, 20-year cost of an e-bus versus diesel. We don't have that information at this time, but we just have the general, 60% less maintenance and 80% less fuel costs for running them. So yeah, that's another thing we'd like to get, talk to people who are doing it, like maybe those people in California with a case study and see how it's going for them. We had some questions also, people put in while they were registering. And I think we've addressed some of these. So Sandy Heim, this was taken before the local school board. They liked it, but let it drop. I think we've addressed this a little bit, Sandy. How to approach the school board, getting parents and students on board. Yeah, maybe a letter to the editor, or finding if there's anyone on the school board who's actually an ally, who you might be able to engage in pushing it forward again. Does anyone else have a suggestion there for Sandy?
Thank you.
So the next one, I think we addressed the leasing the buses, and and things like that. The question of who pays for the electricity, I think it's pretty much going to be the district. I think you're going to have to charge the buses in your district, and pay for the electricity yourself. Unless you can, have solar panels right next to it, and then you can have free electricity that way. From Aaron, we don't have enough money to do this. How do we keep minds open and considering ways to transition if the answer is initially no? So, I mean, hopefully with this funding, if it's successful, and I hope that it will be, that we can continue to get more funding for districts to help them out with the cost, and hopefully also if we can overcome the problems that Dennis has talked about and get these buses out there on the road and get them, that the cost will come down, and so that then it will start to be, when people look at paying for diesel buses and putting the fuel in them, which the cost of diesel is going up, as the cost of the buses comes down, that's going to be an easier argument, I think. Anyone have anything else to add to that? The next one from Karen, we addressed the next grant period for the EPA starts in the spring. We're not certain exactly. We addressed Doug's question about the first student. Greg's question about creating a regional consortium of mutual support for electric school buses. I don't have an answer to that. We've talked a bit about having a broader electric school bus campaign among climate activists that are on this call, and Moms Clean Air Force and things like that, and across the state. But I'm not sure about if this is talking about that, or Craig, is Craig on the call? I don't think so. Does anyone else have an answer for this? Or understand the question better than I do, maybe? Okay.
No, but I think having the air quality monitors is really interesting.
Oh yeah, I forgot that part of it. Yeah, that's really interesting. I just attended a Clean Air Council webinar about air quality monitors that are really inexpensive, like $250, but they have to be attached to Wi-Fi. So I'm not sure it would work on buses, those ones. But yeah, the idea of tracking that particulate matter that the kids are getting exposed to would be really powerful. And that may be one of the things you take back to your school district and say, look what's going on here.
Yeah, well, okay, so if it's Wi-Fi, well, you may not be able to take it on the buses, but you could have it in front of the schools. Like when the kids line up at the end of the school day and there's all those buses that are lined up in front of them and they're standing there waiting, to get on their particular bus with all those fumes, you could have a monitor there connected to the school Wi-Fi.
Right, and there is an EPA limit for how much like PM 2.5 you can have, and before calling it a pollution event. And then, I think we, and the last question, did we already answer that, Jim?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we have some more slides about the EPA program in here. Just as part of the slide deck, Ava went ahead and made a bunch of overview slides about the program, in case these will be included in what we'll send to you along with the recording after this webinar. Does anyone have any more comments or questions they'd like to to bring up? Any? No? I'm gonna stop sharing. That's okay. Maybe it makes it easier for question asking.
I'd like to go back to the vehicle to grid. I thought I saw something somewhere. Maybe was it the Twin Rivers case, or maybe it was the Beverly, Massachusetts case, where I thought that said that they were making money. I seem to recall like a $10,000 to $15,000 a year, money back from the vehicle to grid. But I might be wrong on that. But that's something I will look into. And then, when we send out the email with the recording, I'll let you know what I find out.
It certainly seems like a nice match. Go ahead, Joan.
Yeah, one other point, just a quick point on safety. Because sometimes people will throw, crazy things back at you. There is at least catching fire, right? We know that these rechargeable batteries can catch fire. I think there was at least one. The bus was charging, there were no kids on the bus, nobody got hurt. But that may come up as a question. And I will tell you, my brother is a fireman. These kind of battery fires are very difficult to put out. You cannot put water on them. And so they require special training for the fire department to put these things out. So, I don't think this is a limiting issue, but somebody may throw that back at you at some point.
Now, we got a Chevy Bolt way back in 2017, I guess, or 18. And, Chevrolet experienced about 5 vehicles that caught on fire from the battery. So, we never had any problem, and obviously most people didn't, but they ended up replacing everybody's battery all the same. So, but I remember that when they first came out, people were always saying, oh, the emergency responders won't be able to help people because of the battery, and they'll be worried about getting electrocuted and all that. But I don't really know whether that's a legitimate concern or not.
The fire department does have to be trained because they have to disconnect the battery, and then they need to put special material on the thing to put these fires out. But they're very, very rare. They do make the news a lot, right? They're kind of noteworthy. But when you're driving around with 50 gallons of gasoline underneath your bus, that doesn't make me all that happy either.
That's true.
So Julia, just a comment on the vehicle to grid. So there has been revenue, but without getting too complex. So when you're trading into the grid, you're probably not using the utility. It's a utility benefit, but it depends on your state and your grid, but you're using a curtailment service provider. They have to get paid, and then they're trading into the market. And it depends on the size of are you trading in a megawatt or so everything on the buses now has been not in the megawatt, type range where you're getting enough revenue that they're actually making profits. I would look, the most optimistic I am about vehicle to grid, it is actually a utility program that Duke Energy is running. They want to do all of the school buses for the state of Virginia. I'm not real keen on the utilities controlling everything, but in this case, since it is a grid service, you really do need utility participation and that grid participation with the school district to maximize, that vehicle to grid revenue so that it does become a plus for the school district. I believe it will happen. School buses are a very good use case since they are parked in a predictable manner. It's just early on. I would not count on it happening in 2023 or 24 or 25. Maybe we're talking 26 for certain school districts. But just again, it's early on. The main thing is, as Jim's saying, safe mobility, zero emissions, and parity with the cost of operation. And I think the cost of operation will be less than diesel buses very soon, and as early as late 2023.
Gotcha. So the focus would be saying, this is a potential source of revenue in the future, that could that you could realize, but
Yeah, and
Not,
even
don't
even
count on it now.
right, and even in Highland's contract, it says, hey, if we get $1 million from vehicle to grid from the buses, we will take our cut. And if the market is good enough, we will return this much to the Montgomery County School District. So it is a market, and as you know, electricity markets are very complicated. So sometimes, yeah, you may get a significant amount of revenue from vehicle to grid. Other times, it may not be there. So definitely look, it's in the contract. So what Highland says right now is, yeah, if we meet these criteria, then, this revenue flow will accrue to the school district.
Right. So I think another lesson learned from that is, as much as, you want to, say to Highland or another company, hey, go do this for us, and, there you take over the whole thing. You still need to at least have enough of an understanding to understand what is in your contract and what that actually means for your school district.
Yeah, and that's true, not just with buses. If you do a solar contract, what is the guaranteed cost of the electricity, who's getting the renewable energy credits, so yeah, it's a long contract. And then the other thing is, if they say they're going to guarantee you, okay, this will not cost more than a diesel bus. To Jim's point, if they say that, you could take that to the school district. And if that's ironclad in the contract, you can say, see, we're getting all this emissions reduction at no cost. We're getting safety for our kids and no exposure to emission in our kids at price parity. That, I think that's a reasonable starting point. And then as the vehicle to grid improves and you scale up your fleet, it's like, yeah, we're getting these greater economic savings as well.
Yeah, I think that's all really interesting, and it's fun. One of the things that I love about this campaign is that it's forward looking, and it's not as climate activists, the gloom and doom that we usually talk about. It's how are we going to do this? How are we going to build this future? And I think this is a great, as you said, Dennis, this is a this is a really good case of how could we do this, and because of the way these buses are run in such a regular manner. So I just really like it. So if anyone have any more comments or questions, or we have a little bit of time, but we could also have 13 minutes back for your evening to have a cup of tea and have the cat on your lap.
I just add one thing. So on the big picture, the way I frame it, and the way a lot of people in energy are framing it, there's a lot of parallels with the internet. And look at what we're doing with the internet right now. When it first started as a DARPANET project in the late 70s, they were connecting, how are we ever going to connect 100 computers? And now there's, 2 billion computers. So we're kind of in the equivalent with things like vehicle to grid back in 1980, early 80s, which is good because we're in this amazing growth period. So you're right, Sandy. It's very exciting that, climate adaptation, it can be fun and it can be economically beneficial. Not can be, it will be economically beneficial to dispel this myth. Oh my God, it's going to cost $20 trillion. It's like, well, it's going to cost 50 trillion if we don't do it. And the internet costs 20 trillion. So what? So, and similar to the internet, a lot of these services like vehicle to grid, zero transportation, integration of renewables. The exciting thing is our national labs and our research centers, it's all developed. A lot of it is political will that groups like, the Climate Reality are doing. So, but I would just say, like the internet, there's standards. It has to be meticulous and step by step. So I love the enthusiasm, and I wish it would happen, 30 years ago, but you're talking about is going to be real, but just, with your team, really bring in, there are a lot of amazing experts out there. Just, I would say for any school district, make sure you have the right people on the team. You need a utility expert, you need information technology expert, you need a good mobility expert, and it's a systems approach, very similar to the internet. So build a good team and adopt all these things step by step, and you will reap the rewards economically, energy-wise, and emission-wise.
Right, and in terms of the savings, I think another thing that often gets overlooked is the savings, the health savings, right? You're eliminating, and that's hard for people to see, is, money that's not being spent. But, especially, when you look at the asthma and, all these problems that breathing these diesel fumes can cause, that's future savings that, you're not spending money on those health issues that you would have otherwise.
Absolutely. And that should be in every proposal, not just the energy savings, the economic, but featuring those health savings is huge. And the environmental, the resources, the forests, trees, the impact you're avoiding on farmers.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, well, with that, I thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And I hope that you will go into your school districts and start an electric school bus campaign. And thank you to my co-presenters. I appreciate your being here. And we'll have another Pennsylvania Chapter Coalition event in January. We're going to have Mark Jacobson come, and he's an engineer from Stanford who specializes in carbon capture and storage, but he's going to come and talk to us about renewable energy and storage for everything. So another forward-looking presentation is going to be January 19th. It's a Thursday at 7 p.m. So look for our emails, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Julia. Great job.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.